The interdimensional tear opened above Times Square at precisely the wrong moment, during the annual Heroes Parade celebrating the Avengers' latest victory. What emerged wasn't another Chitauri invasion or a rogue Asgardian artifact. It was something worse. A motorcycle the size of a semi-truck, belching purple flames and blasting heavy metal at eardrum-shattering volumes. Astride it sat Lobo, the main man himself, screaming obscenities in 17 different alien languages as he plummeted toward the crowd below. The crash was spectacular. Lobo's space hog plowed through a massive balloon replica of Captain America, obliterated a hot dog stand, and carved a smoking trench through the asphalt before finally grinding to a halt against a fire hydrant. Water geysered skyward as Lobo rose from the wreckage, completely unharmed and absolutely furious. "Which fraggin' bastitch messed with my dimensional coordinates?" he roared, scanning the terrified crowd. His red eyes blazed beneath his shock of white hair as he brushed concrete dust from his leather vest. Within seconds, Spider-Man swung onto the scene, immediately cracking wise. "Hey there, tall, pale, and angry. Welcome to New York. We have a strict no parking policy for interdimensional motorcycles." Lobo's response was to draw his hook and chain, whipping it toward the web-slinger with lethal precision. Peter barely dodged, his spider sense screaming danger signals unlike anything he'd experienced outside of encounters with the Hulk or Juggernaut. The fight that followed became legend. Lobo tore through responding heroes with brutal efficiency. Luke Cage took a headbutt that sent him crashing through 3 buildings. Jessica Jones got clotheslined into low orbit, and Iron Man's repulsor beams merely annoyed the Sarnian before Lobo grabbed him by the ankle and used him to bat away incoming SHIELD helicopters. The brawl only ended when Doctor Strange arrived, recognizing Lobo as extra-dimensional and creating a mirror dimension prison to contain him temporarily. But temporary was the operative word. Lobo's raw strength and regenerative abilities allowed him to literally punch through dimensional barriers within hours. By the time Strange returned with reinforcements, Lobo had already escaped, stolen another motorcycle from a terrified Hell's Angels member, and was halfway to the nearest bar. His arrival hadn't just shaken New York, it had put the entire superhero community on high alert. The main man had arrived in the Marvel Universe, and absolutely nobody was prepared for the havoc he was about to unleash. Captain America found Lobo 3 days later in a demolished Brooklyn bar, surrounded by unconscious biker gangs and emptied kegs. Steve Rogers entered cautiously, shield raised, trying his usual diplomatic approach. "Sir, I need you to come with me peacefully. We can find a way to get you home." Lobo looked up from his drink, grinned with all his fangs showing, and replied, "Peacefully? Boy Scout, I don't even crap peacefully." The ensuing fight destroyed 4 city blocks. What made Lobo particularly dangerous to Marvel's heroes was that he simply didn't care about their moral codes or reputations. When the Fantastic Four tried to reason with him scientifically, he called Reed Richards a pencil-necked geek and used the Baxter Building as target practice. When the X-Men attempted intervention, seeing him as a potential mutant ally, he laughed and said he didn't work with fraggers who whine about being special. Wolverine took particular offense and challenged him to a one-on-one fight that lasted 6 hours, ended in a draw, and resulted in both combatants developing a grudging respect while sharing cigars in the ruins of a demolished warehouse. The Avengers designated Lobo as a Gamma-level threat after their 3rd encounter ended with the Quinjet embedded in the East River and Hawkeye's dignity permanently damaged. Thor actually enjoyed fighting the Zarnian, recognizing a fellow warrior spirit, even if Lobo's complete lack of honor offended his Asgardian sensibilities. Their battle across Manhattan became the stuff of legend, 2 nearly indestructible beings trading blows that shattered windows for miles, laughing and insulting each other between devastating attacks. It only ended when both got distracted by an actual threat and temporarily teamed up, still arguing about who was tougher.
But Lobo's most dangerous conflict came with the Hulk. Bruce Banner was having a rare peaceful day in the Southwest when Lobo's tracking equipment identified a potential bounty, gamma radiation signatures. Not knowing or caring about the Hulk's reputation, Lobo attacked Banner directly, immediately triggering the transformation. What followed was a fight that registered on seismographs worldwide. The Hulk's rage met Lobo's regenerative immortality in a clash of unstoppable force versus immovable object. They fought for 3 days straight, creating a new desert canyon system in the process. Neither won definitively. The Hulk eventually calmed down when Lobo got bored and rode off to find better-paying work. But the encounter established something crucial. Lobo wasn't just another villain or hero. He was a force of nature, operating on his own wavelength, and traditional superhero tactics simply didn't apply. S.H.I.E.L.D. Director Maria Hill created a special file labeled the Main Man Protocol, essentially advising agents to pay him whatever he wanted and point him at actual threats rather than trying to contain him. Sometimes, she noted grimly, you can't beat the problem, you can only redirect it.
Deadpool found Lobo 2 weeks into the Sarnians' Marvel Universe rampage, and it was hate at first sight, the kind of hate that immediately becomes obsessive friendship. They met over a bounty, both hired to eliminate the same target. Wade got there first, made the kill, and was taking a selfie with the corpse when Lobo crashed through the wall. "That's my payday, you red-suited bastich!" The fight that erupted was less about violence and more about competitive banter, each trying to out-insult the other while regenerating from increasingly absurd injuries. Their rivalry friendship became legendary. They'd take competing bounties just to sabotage each other, team up against mutual enemies while arguing the entire time, and frequently end their encounters drinking together in whatever bar they hadn't destroyed yet. Deadpool appreciated having someone who matched his healing factor and exceeded his capacity for violence, while Lobo enjoyed Wade's complete disregard for conventional reality. "You're almost as messed up as a Sarnian," Lobo once said, which Deadpool took as the highest compliment he'd ever received. Their team-up comic would immediately become Marvel's most violent and commercially successful series. The cosmic side of Marvel proved to be Lobo's natural habitat, much to the Guardians of the Galaxy's dismay. Their first encounter occurred when both were after the same fugitive hiding on Nowhere. Star-Lord tried his usual charm offensive, which Lobo responded to by stealing his music player and throwing it into space. Rocket actually got along with Lobo initially, appreciating his violent efficiency, until Lobo called him the Raccoon one too many times, and a weapons-drawn standoff ensued. Groot tried to intervene peacefully and got chainsawed into kindling, though he regenerated and surprisingly didn't hold a grudge. Drax the Destroyer and Lobo developed an odd friendship based on mutual respect for straightforward violence. Neither understood sarcasm, both preferred solving problems with their fists, and they enjoyed comparing kill counts. Gamora found Lobo repulsive but professionally acknowledged his combat skills, while Mantis stayed far away after attempting to read his emotions and experiencing what she described as psychic indigestion from pure concentrated bastardry. The Guardians eventually reached an uneasy truce with Lobo. They'd occasionally hire him for jobs too dirty even for them, paying premium rates to ensure he pointed his violence elsewhere. But the most anticipated matchup was Lobo versus Thanos. The Mad Titan heard about this unkillable mercenary causing chaos across the galaxy and decided to eliminate him personally, seeing Lobo as an affront to death itself. Their battle on a barren moon lasted for weeks, with Thanos using the full extent of his power and strategic genius against Lobo's relentless regeneration and complete refusal to die. Lobo couldn't permanently harm Thanos, but Thanos couldn't kill what literally couldn't be killed. The fight ended in mutual frustration, with Thanos teleporting away and Lobo declaring victory,
Though really, nobody won except the weapons manufacturers, who later salvaged the moon for exotic materials created during their clash. Thanos added Lobo to his very short list of beings he'd rather avoid, while Lobo gained bragging rights he'd never let anyone forget.
The criminal underworld of Marvel initially saw Lobo as an opportunity. Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, made the mistake of trying to hire him through intermediaries, offering a modest sum to eliminate a rival. Lobo took the money, completed the job, then crashed into Fisk's office demanding triple pay for hazard fees, dimensional displacement costs, and general inconvenience. When Kingpin's enforcers drew weapons, Lobo demonstrated why that was a poor decision by hanging them from the ceiling by their own intestines, non-fatally but memorably. Fisk tripled the payment immediately and established a lucrative working relationship based on mutual understanding. Pay premium rates up front, never try to cheat the main man, and accept some collateral damage. Roxxon Corporation saw Lobo differently, as a strategic asset for operations requiring absolute deniability. Their executive board authorized blank check contracts for wet work that even their darkest subsidiaries wouldn't touch. Lobo appreciated corporate clients because they had deep pockets and didn't bore him with moral lectures. He'd eliminate environmental protesters blocking oil operations, destroy evidence of illegal experiments, and intimidate competitors into bankruptcy, all while charging exorbitant fees. The Avengers tried to stop these activities several times, but Lobo's contracts were technically legal in various jurisdictions, and he always had expensive lawyers on retainer, paid for by his corporate employers who valued plausible deniability. S.H.I.E.L.D. eventually adopted a pragmatic approach after Director Hill realized containment was impossible and elimination was impractical. Instead, they created a classified mercenary program, hiring Lobo for missions too dangerous or morally compromising for official agents. Need a terrorist cell eliminated without regard for collateral damage? Call Lobo. Need someone to infiltrate an alien invasion force by pretending to join them and then betraying everyone violently? Lobo's your man. Need someone who can survive being thrown into a black hole to retrieve classified data? The main man charges extra for cosmic hazards, but delivers results. The Thunderbolts were an obvious fit, a team of reformed villains and morally gray operators working for redemption or reduced sentences. General Ross personally recruited Lobo, offering full pardons for his Earth-based incidents in exchange for service. Lobo agreed mainly because it sounded entertaining, and the Thunderbolts missions involved maximum violence with legal immunity. His time on the team was chaotic. He got along surprisingly well with Ghost Rider, bonding over chains and motorcycles, constantly fought with Punisher over methodology, and drove Red Hulk to distraction with complete insubordination. But he was effective, and that's what mattered. Ultimately, Lobo carved out a unique niche in the Marvel Universe. He was neither hero nor villain, but a force of mercenary chaos that everyone had to accommodate. The cosmic community learned to hire him for impossible jobs, Earth's heroes learned to occasionally point him at bigger threats, and the criminal underworld learned to meet his price or face his wrath. He became a permanent fixture, the main man who operated by his own rules in a universe that had no choice but to accept him. And honestly, the Marvel Universe became a lot more interesting and significantly more violent for having him around. The Living Tribunal noticed Lobo approximately 6 months after his arrival, recognizing him as an extra-dimensional anomaly that shouldn't exist in this reality. The abstract entity manifested before Lobo while he was mid-bounty, hunting a Skrull fugitive through the Andromeda Galaxy. "Your presence violates the fundamental balance of this universe," the tribunal declared in its cosmic voice. Lobo looked up from hog-tying his captive, cigar clenched between his teeth, and responded with his typical eloquence. "Yeah? Well, your face violates my fundamental right to not look at ugly crap."
The tribunal, an entity that had witnessed the birth and death of galaxies, experienced something unprecedented, complete bafflement at such profound disrespect. The abstract beings of Marvel's cosmos found Lobo to be an inexplicable paradox. Eternity sensed him as a foreign element disrupting the universal flow, but couldn't remove him without potentially damaging reality itself. Death was particularly intrigued because Lobo literally couldn't die. His Sarzanian regeneration factor, combined with a curse from his home universe that barred him from entering any afterlife. This made him offensive to the natural order, yet Death found herself oddly fascinated by the one being in this entire universe who would never join her embrace. She occasionally manifested near him just to observe, which Lobo found deeply creepy and told her so repeatedly. The Celestials examined Lobo during one of his cosmic jobs, their enormous forms surrounding him on a barren planetoid. They scanned him with energies that had unmade entire species, attempting to understand his extra-dimensional biology. Lobo stood there picking his teeth with a knife, utterly unbothered, occasionally flipping off whichever Celestial was currently hovering too close. When they attempted to correct his existence through direct intervention, their cosmic energies only made him angry. The resulting fight saw Lobo actually damaging a Celestial's armor, not seriously, but enough to shock beings that had existed since the universe's dawn. They eventually departed, adding Lobo to their files as an acceptable aberration, mainly because eliminating him seemed more trouble than it was worth. Galactus encountered Lobo when the main man was hired to evacuate a planet the Devourer was approaching. Most beings fled screaming from the World Eater. Lobo rode his space hog directly at Galactus's face and demanded hazard pay for the unexpected cosmic threat. "You're in my way, little one," Galactus rumbled, to which Lobo replied, "And you're ugly, but I ain't complainin'." The Silver Surfer intervened before things escalated, fascinated by a being who showed absolutely no fear of his master. Norrin Radd and Lobo developed an odd acquaintanceship. The philosophical herald and the crude mercenary would occasionally cross paths, with the Surfer trying to understand Lobo's existence, while Lobo mocked his shiny naked space elf appearance. But the most significant cosmic complication came from the Beyonder during one of his periodic visits to observe humanity. The nigh-omnipotent entity became curious about this extra-dimensional being who didn't belong in his creation. He transported Lobo to his dimension for study, which Lobo responded to by immediately attacking him. The Beyonder, amused, allowed the assault to continue, curious to see what would happen. For 3 days, Lobo unleashed every weapon in his arsenal: molecular disruptors, black hole grenades, reality-warping tech stolen from various sources, while the Beyonder simply observed and took notes. Finally, the cosmic being returned Lobo to normal space with a single thought, commenting that he found him entertainingly persistent, but ultimately limited. Lobo, furious at being dismissed, added killing that white-haired fragger to his bucket list, a goal he pursued with typical obsessive determination, despite its obvious impossibility.
The day Lobo saved an orphanage was the day the Marvel Universe briefly questioned reality itself. It wasn't intentional. He was chasing a bounty through Harlem when his target used children as hostages. Lobo's response was characteristic. He shot the criminal through the shoulder from 3 blocks away, then caught all 12 children as the building exploded, depositing them safely on the street before resuming his hunt. Luke Cage witnessed the entire event and spread the word. The main man had a line he wouldn't cross. It was buried deep under layers of violence and profanity, but it existed. This led to an unexpected recruitment from an unlikely source. The Avengers needed someone for a mission that required absolute moral flexibility, combined with a strange code of honor.
A child had been kidnapped by an organization that would kill her the moment conventional heroes appeared. They needed someone who could infiltrate as a credible villain, someone the kidnappers would believe, and someone who'd protect the child once inside. Captain America personally asked Lobo, offering a staggering sum and appealing to whatever shred of decency existed beneath the bounty hunter's crude exterior. "You want me to play hero? That's going to cost extra," Lobo said, but he took the job. The rescue was brutal, efficient, and saved the girl's life. The kidnappers were found in pieces. The Avengers never publicly acknowledged Lobo's involvement, but a substantial anonymous payment appeared in his account. Spider-Man became an unlikely semi-friend after a team-up against Carnage. The symbiotic serial killer was on a rampage that required someone willing to use lethal force, and Peter reluctantly called in Lobo through S.H.I.E.L.D. channels. What followed was a masterclass in controlled violence. Lobo kept Carnage busy with overwhelming firepower, while Spider-Man evacuated civilians and worked on a sonic weapon. They bickered constantly, Lobo mocking Peter's Boy Scout tendencies, while Peter criticized the main man's excessive brutality, but they worked together effectively. Afterward, they'd occasionally team up when situations called for Peter to bend his no-kill rule by outsourcing the lethal work. They'd never admit to being friends, but they developed mutual respect, and Lobo only charged Peter half his usual rate, which the mercenary considered the highest compliment possible. The X-Men's relationship with Lobo evolved after he helped during a Sentinel attack, not out of heroism, but because giant robots had interrupted his poker game and destroyed his winnings. Storm found herself fighting alongside him, simultaneously appalled by his methods and impressed by his effectiveness. He carved through Sentinels like they were tin cans, laughing maniacally the entire time. Professor Xavier later attempted to telepathically understand Lobo and immediately regretted it. The Sarnaean's mind was a screaming chaos of violence, bad music, and deeply buried trauma that even Xavier's vast experience couldn't fully process. "His thoughts gave me a migraine," Xavier admitted to the team. "But underneath it all, there's something almost tragic." That tragic element emerged during a quiet moment with Wolverine, both of them drinking in a Canadian bar after a particularly brutal mission. Logan, recognizing a kindred spirit in perpetual violence and loss, asked about Sarnea. For once, Lobo answered honestly. He was the last of his kind because he'd killed them all, every man, woman, and child on his planet, an act of genocide he committed as a teenager for reasons he rarely discussed. Unlike Wolverine's reluctant violence or tragic past, Lobo owned his atrocities completely. Yet Logan sensed something beneath the bravado, a loneliness so profound that violence and crude humor were the only ways to fill the void. "You ever regret it, bub?" Logan asked. He drained his beer, crushed the can, and replied, "Every fraggin' day. That's why I don't stop moving." It was the most honest thing anyone in the Marvel Universe had heard from him, and Logan never repeated it to anyone. Some wounds were too deep, even for healing factors.
Dr. Doom heard about Lobo and immediately recognized a potential asset, or threat. Victor Von Doom didn't become ruler of Latveria by ignoring powerful variables, and an unkillable interdimensional mercenary definitely qualified. He invited Lobo to Latveria under the pretense of offering a lucrative contract. The meeting went poorly from the start. Doom expected deference to his genius and authority. Lobo called him Tin Man and put his boots on Doom's priceless antique table. The resulting fight destroyed half the castle. Doom's sorcery and technology couldn't overcome Lobo's regeneration, while Lobo's weapons couldn't penetrate Doom's shields indefinitely. They reached a stalemate that became grudging professional respect.
Doom occasionally hired Lobo for operations requiring complete deniability, paying premium rates for the mercenary services. Lobo appreciated that Doom never tried to double-cross him, not out of honor, but because Victor understood the cost-benefit analysis of betraying an unkillable force of nature. Their partnership was purely transactional, but Doom recognized something useful: Lobo's complete lack of political ambition. Unlike other powerful beings, the main man didn't want to conquer anything. He just wanted to get paid and cause mayhem. That made him predictable, and Doom valued predictability. Still, Victor kept extensive contingency plans for neutralizing Lobo, updating them after every encounter, because planning for every possibility was what separated genius from arrogance. Norman Osborn made the opposite mistake during his Dark Reign period. As head of Hammer and leader of the Dark Avengers, Osborn thought he could control Lobo through manipulation and leverage. He hired the main man for a Black Ops mission, then attempted to shortchange him on payment, believing his position and power made him untouchable. Lobo responded by destroying 3 Hammer facilities, throwing Dakin through a wall twice, and hanging Osborn upside down from Avengers Tower with a sign reading "Cheating Bastich." The incident humiliated Norman publicly and demonstrated that some beings existed outside conventional power structures. Osborn paid triple the original contract to make Lobo go away, learning an expensive lesson about respecting mercenary agreements. The Masters of Evil attempted to recruit Lobo, seeing him as the ultimate heavy hitter for their villainous organization. Baron Zemo personally extended the invitation, appealing to Lobo's violent nature and promising unlimited targets. Lobo's response was characteristically crude. "I don't join fragging clubs, especially ones with stupid names and matching outfits." When they pressed the issue, he beat the entire team unconscious in under 5 minutes, stole their operational funds, and left a note suggesting they rename themselves the Masters of Getting Their Asses Kicked. The Masters of Evil learned what the Avengers had already discovered. Lobo didn't fit into conventional hero-villain dynamics because he simply didn't care about their conflicts beyond profit potential. Magneto proved more successful in working with Lobo, mainly because Eric treated him as an equal rather than a subordinate. During a mission where their interests aligned, stopping a weapons manufacturer creating mutant hunting technology, they worked together efficiently. Magneto respected Lobo's directness and raw power, while Lobo appreciated that Magneto didn't preach or moralize, just stated his goals clearly. "You fight for your people, I fight for cash," Lobo said during their temporary alliance. "Long as our targets align, we're good." Magneto nodded, understanding that Lobo's mercenary nature made him more reliable than ideologically driven allies who might waver. When the job ended, they parted professionally, both knowing they'd likely fight as enemies in the future, but respecting each other's capabilities. The criminal underworld quickly established protocols for dealing with Lobo. The Magia families created a shared fund specifically for hiring or avoiding him. The Hand tried to assassinate him once and lost an entire ninja battalion in the attempt. AIM paid him to field test weapons, which he did enthusiastically, providing detailed feedback consisting mostly of "killed good" or "didn't kill good enough." Hydra attempted recruitment multiple times, finally giving up after Lobo destroyed 3 secret bases just for annoying him with spam recruitment messages. The universal rule became simple: if you needed Lobo, pay his rate up front and stay out of his way. If you opposed Lobo, either pay him more to switch sides or run very, very fast.
After 2 years in the Marvel Universe, the Watchers convened to discuss the Lobo situation. Uatu himself had been observing the Sarnians' impact on this reality, noting how a single extra-dimensional being had fundamentally altered countless probability streams. The main man's presence had prevented 3 apocalyptic scenarios simply through chaotic intervention. He'd killed a Skrull sleeper agent who would have assassinated key leaders, disrupted a Kree weapons program by stealing their prototype for personal use, and accidentally prevented a demonic invasion by destroying a cult summoning circle while chasing a bounty. Yet he'd also caused 17 international incidents, destroyed infrastructure worth billions, and killed hundreds of beings, admittedly mostly criminals and hostile aliens, but still. The question the Watchers debated was whether Lobo's net impact was positive or negative for universal stability. Some argued his chaotic nature prevented stagnation and disrupted enemy plans through sheer unpredictability. Others maintained he represented an existential risk that could eventually cause irreparable damage. Uatu, who had watched this universe longer than most civilizations had existed, offered a characteristically enigmatic observation. He is a reminder that control is an illusion. The universe does not conform to our expectations, and perhaps that is healthy. The Watchers took no action, choosing to continue observing, as was their nature. Lobo, if he'd known about their debate, would have told them to mind their own business in language that would make cosmic entities blush. The superhero community remained divided. Tony Stark kept extensive files on Lobo, constantly updating threat assessments and noting that the Sarnian represented a unique challenge. You couldn't reason with him, couldn't threaten him, couldn't kill him, and couldn't predict him reliably. Yet Tony also acknowledged Lobo had been useful in situations requiring someone willing to cross lines heroes couldn't. Black Widow understood Lobo better than most, recognizing him as an extreme version of what she'd once been, a weapon pointed at targets by whoever paid. She pitied him slightly, seeing the isolation beneath his bravado, but she also kept a contingency plan for neutralizing him that involved orbital weapons and lots of explosives. The cosmic community adapted fastest, treating Lobo as a natural disaster you prepared for rather than prevented. The Shi'ar Empire issued bounties for him to stay out of their territory, essentially paying protection money to avoid his chaos. The Kree designated him a beneficial destabilizer, occasionally hiring him to disrupt Skrull operations. The Skrulls, unable to impersonate someone whose biology was completely alien to their universe, simply tried to avoid him entirely. Nova Corps created special protocols for Lobo encounters, attempt negotiation, offer reasonable payment for cooperation, and never ever try to arrest him unless you had at least 50 Centurions willing to be hospitalized. But perhaps the truest measure of Lobo's impact came from the streets. In New York, pulling a Lobo became slang for solving a problem through excessive force and zero subtlety. Children played games where someone was designated the main man and had to catch everyone else while speaking in deliberately bad space trucker dialogue. Conspiracy theorists debated whether he was a government weapon, an alien invasion scout, or divine punishment for humanity's sins. Fan communities argued endlessly about whether he counted as a hero, a villain, or something else entirely. Merchandising companies made millions selling unlicensed Lobo t-shirts until he showed up at their offices demanding royalties, which they paid immediately. Would the Marvel Universe survive the main man? The answer, after 2 years of chaos, seemed to be yes, but it was a different universe now. Lobo had carved out his niche through sheer force of personality and unkillable persistence. Heroes learned to occasionally hire him when morality became inconvenient. Villains learned to either meet his price or face his wrath. Cosmic entities learned that some problems couldn't be solved, only endured. And Lobo? He kept taking contracts, causing mayhem, drinking in bars across the galaxy, and being himself with absolute, unapologetic commitment. He hadn't asked to be in this universe, but now that he was here, everyone else would just have to deal with it. The main man had arrived,
and the Marvel Universe would never be quite the same. Whether that was good or bad remained a question without an easy answer, which was probably exactly how Lobo preferred it.
The Bugle's headline read, "Main Man Menace or Misunderstood," in typically sensational J. Jonah Jameson fashion, though this time the question genuinely divided public opinion. Lobo had become a household name across Earth and beyond, representing everything complicated about the modern superhero age. Talk shows debated whether he was a necessary evil or just evil. Politicians tried to legislate against interdimensional mercenaries, creating laws that Lobo immediately violated, while his lawyers argued jurisdictional technicalities. The United Nations attempted to classify him as either a weapon of mass destruction or a foreign dignitary, settling eventually on a unique category: extra-dimensional independent contractor with extreme prejudice protocols. Social media exploded with Lobo content. Videos of his fights garnered billions of views, carefully edited to remove the most graphic violence, but keeping enough to showcase his effectiveness. Memes proliferated. Lobo says "pay your mercenaries" became shorthand for respecting service workers, while going full main man meant handling problems with maximum aggression and zero diplomacy. Influencers tried to interview him, which usually ended with destroyed equipment and terrified camera crews. One persistent journalist from Vice actually succeeded by offering him a case of Sarnanian ale she'd somehow acquired from cosmic traders. The resulting interview was 90% profanity that had to be bleeped, but the 10% of actual content revealed surprising insights into his philosophy. Life's simple. Someone pays you, you do the job. Someone crosses you, you make them regret it. Everything else is just noise. The superhero community found itself reconsidering fundamental assumptions because of Lobo's presence. Young heroes in training asked uncomfortable questions. If Lobo could solve problems through violence that diplomacy couldn't, what did that say about their methods? Veteran heroes struggled to explain why Lobo was wrong when he got results they couldn't achieve. The ethical debates intensified at Avengers meetings, with Tony Stark arguing for pragmatic utilization of Lobo's capabilities, while Captain America maintained that compromising principles, even for effectiveness, led down dangerous paths. "We've hired him before," Tony pointed out. "Pretending we haven't doesn't change that we will again when we're desperate enough." Steve couldn't argue with the logic, only the implications. Academic institutions began studying the Lobo phenomenon in sociology and ethics courses. Harvard's philosophy department hosted symposiums on consequentialist ethics using Lobo as a case study. Could ends justify means when the means were literally an unkillable alien mercenary who casually violated every moral principle but somehow often achieved positive outcomes? MIT's engineering departments analyzed his technology, trying to reverse engineer weapons that clearly operated on principles beyond Earth science. Empire State University's xenobiology program offered a full scholarship to anyone who could obtain a viable DNA sample from Lobo, an offer that remained perpetually unclaimed because nobody was suicidal enough to try. Religious communities had varied responses. Some saw Lobo as a test of faith, a being from another reality challenging their cosmological assumptions. Others viewed him as demonic, pointing to his appearance and violent nature as evidence of infernal origins. A few fringe groups worshipped him as a god of chaos, which Lobo found hilarious and occasionally exploited for free drinks. When asked about his spiritual beliefs during a rare philosophical moment with Nightcrawler, Lobo shrugged. "Life's simple. Someone pays you, you do the job. Someone crosses you, you make them regret it. Everything else is just noise." The economic impact was substantial.
Insurance companies created special Lobo clauses excluding damage caused by interdimensional mercenaries, while construction firms made fortunes rebuilding whatever he destroyed. Defense contractors studied his weapons technology, trying to replicate it for military applications. The Empire State University space tourism industry used his presence as a selling point. Visit Earth, where the legendary main man operates. Tourism actually increased in cities he frequented, with people hoping to glimpse him in action from safe distances. Economists calculated his net economic impact and concluded he simultaneously destroyed and created wealth at unprecedented rates, essentially breaking traditional models. One MIT professor published a paper titled Lobo Economics: When Creative Destruction Becomes Literal, which became required reading in several business schools, despite being primarily a collection of property damage statistics and insurance payout calculations.
The moment that defined Lobo's place in the Marvel Universe came during the Annihilation Wave crisis, when Annihilus led his forces from the negative zone, threatening to consume the entire positive matter universe. Every hero mobilized for the greatest battle in cosmic history. Lobo was on a backwater planet, drunk and enjoying retirement from a particularly lucrative contract when Nova Prime Richard Rider found him. "We need everyone," Richard said simply. "This is extinction level. I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm hiring you. The entire Nova Corps treasury, everything we have." Lobo looked at the desperate young Centurion and laughed. "Kid, I don't work for causes." But then he saw the genuine fear in Richard's eyes, not for himself, but for billions of innocents, and something shifted. "Fine, but I ain't doing it for your money. Consider it a professional courtesy to someone with balls big enough to ask." The battle that followed became legend. Lobo fought alongside heroes he'd previously battled, protecting worlds he didn't care about, facing enemies he had no personal stake in defeating. He anchored the front line at the kiln, holding off waves of annihilation forces while Nova Corps evacuated prisoners. He fought beside Drax, Gamora, and Peter Quill, his crude jokes and aggressive tactics somehow fitting perfectly into their desperate last stand. When Ronan the Accuser fell, Lobo picked up his universal weapon and used it to devastating effect, screaming Charnian war cries that terrified even the mindless annihilation bugs. He took wounds that would have killed anyone else, regenerated, and kept fighting. For 3 days, the main man became exactly what his nickname suggested, the main defense against extinction. When Annihilus himself appeared, targeting the vulnerable evacuation ships, Lobo intercepted him personally. Their battle tore through space stations and asteroid fields, two beings of immense power locked in brutal combat. Lobo couldn't match Annihilus's cosmic power, but he didn't need to. He just needed to delay him long enough for the evacuation to complete. He absorbed energy blasts that would have atomized planets, regenerated from being literally torn apart, and kept coming back with increasingly creative insults. "That the best you got, bug boy? My grandma hit harder and she was dead." The fight bought the critical minutes needed. When Annihilus finally blasted Lobo into a collapsing star, everyone assumed the mercenary was finally dead. They were wrong. 20 minutes later, Lobo crawled out of the stellar core, mostly skeleton, screaming in pain and fury as his regeneration worked overtime. In the aftermath, as heroes counted their dead and mourned their losses, Lobo was found in the wreckage of a destroyed bar, drinking whatever alcohol hadn't been destroyed. Nova Prime approached him personally. "You didn't take the payment," Richard said quietly. Lobo shrugged, his body still covered in healing burns. "Told you it was professional courtesy. Besides, the fight was fun." But Richard saw something in the Charnian's eyes, not heroism exactly, but recognition. In that moment of genuine extinction threat, Lobo had made a choice that wasn't about money or violence or his own entertainment. He'd chosen to stand with others against the dark. "You're one of us now, whether you admit it or not," Richard said. Lobo's response was characteristically crude, but he didn't actually deny it.
The superhero community's perception of Lobo fundamentally shifted after Annihilation. The Avengers extended a permanent consulting contract, not asking him to join, but acknowledging him as an ally when needed. The Guardians of the Galaxy officially listed him as an auxiliary member with extreme prejudice clearance, which Lobo accepted mainly because it came with discounts at cosmic trading posts. Even Captain America, who'd fought Lobo multiple times, sent a personal message. "Thank you for standing with us when it mattered most. You're not what I'd call a hero, but you're someone I'd trust to have my back when the universe is ending." Lobo never responded to the message, but he kept it in his ship's database, encrypted and hidden where nobody would find it. The turning point wasn't that Lobo became good. He remained violent, crude, mercenary, and utterly uncompromising in his nature. But the Marvel Universe stopped trying to categorize him as hero or villain and accepted him as something more complex, a being who operated by his own code, who'd fight for payment or entertainment, or occasionally just because something pissed him off enough. He'd stood at the universe's darkest hour and fought not for ideology or morality, but because in that moment, fighting was the right thing to do. It was the closest thing to redemption someone like Lobo could achieve, and the closest thing to acceptance the Marvel Universe could offer. They'd never fully trust each other, but they'd reached an understanding forged in the fires of near extinction. The main man had proven he was more than just chaos. He was their chaos, and in a universe constantly threatened by forces beyond comprehension, maybe that was enough.
3 years after Lobo's arrival in the Marvel Universe, Doctor Strange finally discovered a method to return him to his home dimension. The ritual was complex, requiring alignment of specific cosmic energies and cooperation from several abstract entities who were more than happy to facilitate the Sarnian's departure. Strange approached Lobo during one of his rare quiet moments, finding him at a bar on Nowhere. "I can send you home," Steven said simply, laying out the technical details. Lobo listened, drained his drink, and then did something that surprised the Sorcerer Supreme. He laughed. "Home? Doc, I fragged that place into dust centuries ago. I got no home." Strange persisted. "Then another dimension, somewhere you'd fit better, somewhere that isn't here." Lobo considered this, actually thought about it seriously, then shook his head. "Nah, I got contracts here, people who owe me money, bastards I ain't punched yet. Maybe I'll take you up on it someday, but not today." The truth was that Lobo had become an integral part of Marvel's cosmic ecosystem. His reputation preceded him across galaxies, the unkillable mercenary who'd fight anyone for the right price, but had a strange code that prevented him from being truly evil. Young heroes knew to call him when situations required extreme solutions. Villains knew to pay him fairly or face consequences. Cosmic threats knew that their invasion plans needed to account for one unpredictable Sarnian who might decide their presence annoyed him enough to warrant intervention. He wasn't a pillar of the hero community, but he was a constant, like gravity or entropy or the inevitable heat death of the universe, except significantly more violent and substantially ruder. The relationships he'd formed, however dysfunctional, mattered in ways Lobo himself rarely acknowledged. Deadpool considered him a genuine friend, someone who understood the isolation of being unkillable and insane in a universe that feared both. Wolverine saw him as a cautionary tale, but also as someone who'd faced similar darkness and survived, even if their paths through that darkness differed radically. Spider-Man kept his number for emergencies, trusting that Lobo would do terrible things for good reasons when Peter's conscience couldn't allow it. Even the Guardians, who still complained about him constantly, would call him for impossible jobs because they knew he'd deliver results, however messily. These weren't friendships in conventional terms. Lobo didn't do conventional anything, but they were connections, and for someone who'd destroyed his entire species, connections mattered more than he'd ever admit. The Marvel Universe, for its part, had adapted around him like scar tissue forming around a wound.
Systems developed to handle Lobo incidents, insurance policies, emergency response protocols, diplomatic channels for explaining his actions to offended alien governments. The cosmic community established the Main Man Accords, an informal agreement about payment standards and acceptable collateral damage when hiring him. Earth's governments maintained special funds for either hiring him or cleaning up after him, depending on the situation. He'd become institutionalized chaos, which was probably the most organized Lobo had ever been in his entire existence. Future historians, both human and alien, would debate Lobo's impact for centuries. Some would argue he made the Marvel Universe more dangerous, introducing unpredictable violence into an already chaotic cosmos. Others would point to the lives saved when his intervention prevented catastrophes that conventional heroes couldn't stop. The truth, as with most historical questions, was complicated. Lobo was a weapon, a force of nature, a mercenary, occasionally an ally, and perpetually himself. Crude, violent, unkillable, and absolutely uncompromising. He'd carved his legend not through heroism or villainy, but through sheer persistence and overwhelming force of personality. Did the Marvel Universe survive Lobo? Yes. Was it changed by him? Absolutely. The Main Man had proven that even in a universe filled with gods, monsters, and cosmic abstractions, there was one more impossibility, a being who belonged nowhere but somehow fit everywhere, who fought for profit but occasionally for something resembling principle, who claimed to care about nothing but consistently showed up when annihilation threatened. He was a paradox, a contradiction, and a permanent fixture in Marvel's cosmic landscape, and whether that made the universe better or worse depended entirely on who you asked and whether Lobo had recently destroyed their property. The Main Man had landed in the Marvel Universe, and 3 years later, the only certainty was that he wasn't leaving anytime soon. And honestly, despite the chaos, the destruction, and the astronomical repair bills, the universe had become a lot more interesting for having him around. Some would call that a tragedy, others would call it entertainment. Lobo would call it Tuesday and demand another beer.